Well, you, Pierre, introduce Don, and Don introduces you, gives a little biographical background. Is it the Chiefs or the 49ers on Sunday?
Next question, please.
Don, since it's clear, we'll ask. Do you know, what's your sense of all of that? We got the Super Bowl right in our face.
I'd say the 49ers.
49ers. You want another chance at this?
See? No.
No. Okay. So, Don McCord, I've known an awful long period of time. And in fact, what I really know most about Don is the fact that he married well. And his wife from Frewsburg, New York, and went to the Robert H. Jackson Elementary School. And in fact, won the Robert H. Jackson essay early on in her career, which then launched her. So, can you add a little bit more to that, like wife's name and stuff like that?
Well, my wife is Judy. She was Judy Yost. And she was a special ed teacher after that for 32 years. So, yes, I guess that did launch her in a good direction.
Which is a message for most that knowing a lot about Jackson is a good launching pad for most things. I suspect that's what you're really saying.
That is.
Okay. Now, while you have the mic, Don, but let's flip the roles. We have Pierre Chagnon. We know he's the chairman of the legislature, but he's got every role humanly possible. What can you tell me about him?
Well, Pierre has been active in the community for many years. I've learned that in particular over the last few years since he's been involved with the legislature. I didn't realize that Pierre was such a large part of the sewer agency and the formation of sewers around Chautauqua Lake many years ago when he first became involved in public service. But Pierre's always been a great asset to our county, and I've always used him as a sounding board for many of the challenges and ideas that come through my office.
So, first of all, let's talk about your office, then we're going to go on to the next level here. What do you do?
Well, our office is the Office of Planning and Community Development, and we're often asked what we do, and we cover a little bit of everything. We have been heavily involved with Chautauqua Lake for at least the last decade, and the department actually before my time was involved with Chautauqua Lake back during the early 90s with the 1990 SEIS. We actually had a limnologist that was part of our overall staff because we were that heavily involved with the process. But we do a lot of community work, a lot of zoning and land use referrals, and assist with a lot of plans.
So you're the director at Chautauqua County Division of Planning and Community Development. That's your tagline.
Correct.
And your prior life, you were SUNY Fredonia?
Yeah, SUNY Fredonia graduate.
And what'd you major in?
Business administration.
Did you expect you would spend most of your life in public sector?
I really didn't. I thought at one time that I would probably never join the public sector, and then I found a job in the planning field, and it interested me a lot when I saw the job application, and I've been there ever since.
Who was your first boss?
Gil Randall.
Gil Randall? Yeah. And Pierre, you haven't said anything yet, so let's go over to you, other than say no and you'll give some consideration to something. You're a Cornell type of guy, and what brought you to, are you a native of the area?
I'm a native, yes. I grew up on Chautauqua Lake.
And what's your early recollections? Were you a boater, a swimmer, a water skier, or all those things?
My first recollection of Chautauqua Lake was when my brothers and sister took me out to the end of the dock when I was about 2 years old and decided it was time for me to learn how to swim. So they threw me off the end of the dock and said, "Swim."
And I assume you did? Or was this the big hand of your dad coming in and pulling you out?
Oh, he was nowhere to be seen at that time. It was all my brothers and sisters.
Yeah. So that's your first introduction to Chautauqua Lake. So you're a Bemis Point area guy?
Yes, Bemis Point. Live there now. So other than my time away at college, I've been a a Bemis Point kind of guy.
So you're Cornell University Johnson School of Business and Public Administration, got your MBA in finance. Matthews Tire and Tread, I remember that. That was your first job back here?
Family business, yes.
Family business?
Right. I had intentions of spreading my wings much more widely. I'd actually had a job offer in France, but family business called. They needed me, so I returned to take over the family business.
And then at some point you end up at TRW.
Yes, my now wife actually got me a job there. It got me my first real job.
Can you, your wife is here, let's point her out.
Oh, she's sitting in the audience, right? She remembers well the last year when she was here for her birthday and what you did to her then. So
She's going to remain nameless at this point?
it's my wife Judy, my lovely wife Judy.
And you also have your daughter here too.
Our daughter Janelle is here with us as well.
And she's a person of significance, right?
Definitely in our family. Yes.
Yeah. Aside from telling you that, what she has somewhat of a role. She's an advisor.
She's a professional engineer, a civil engineer, and she actually was one of the authors of the Consolidated Sewage Management Plan for Chautauqua Lake.
So she knows if we run out of questions, she'll be right there for us.
She's good at that.
Okay. So TRW then beckons, you get the job there because of your wife, and give me the stepping stones there till ultimately you become a big deal there.
Well, TRW, I worked for them for 5 years, and then they sold the company to a Swedish company, SKF, which is the largest bearing company in the world, so we were in a good family at that point. TRW and SKF were very good to me. In the first 13 years I was there, I had 10 different jobs. They were very good at moving me around. I did lots of different things in the company in lots of different areas. Ultimately wound up as the director of operations for bearing manufacturing and development in North America. Had an opportunity to form a joint venture with our largest customer, General Electric, build a plant down in South Carolina. Had some great experiences. The company was very, very good to me.
And I must personally point out the fact that Pierre Chagnon was very instrumental in making sure that we, Chautauqua County, retained SKF during a fairly delicate negotiation time. So on behalf of many, thank you.
That's a story in and out of itself.
I lived a little bit of it, but yeah, you were there. How does one like Pierre Chagnon get involved in things like the South Center's Chautauqua Lake Sewer Districts?
Well, I had just started work at TRW, and that's when the project that had begun to build the South and Center sewer districts had far exceeded budget, and the project was shut down by state government, and the sewer district boards were disbanded. And one day my boss came to me and said, "Hey," he said, "your father used to be involved with the lake. He was involved with the Chautauqua Lake Association. He was a past president of that or something." He said, "You'd really like to help Chautauqua Lake, wouldn't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." First time I'd ever met the president of the company. I wasn't going to say anything other than yes. And he said, "We need you to get involved. We're forming a citizens group to try and resurrect this project." I said, "Yes, sir," and that's where it began.
Part and parcel of these, as you were being part of the reactivation of that district, is the planning, the cost overruns. There's a whole lot of litigation, but ultimately, I mean, can you explain kind of what the South and Center Sewer District geographically is these days?
Well, the two districts, because they are still unique entities, but we operate them as one district. It runs on the north side of the lake from the Flavanna area up to Midway Park. And on the west side, or the south side of the lake, it runs from Celeron up through Asheville, Boces, and Sunrise Cove development. So what we built was everything on the north side of the lake, the east side of the lake, and the extension from Lakewood up to Asheville-Bossies, and redoing of the old Celeron system, West Ellicott system, and Lakewood systems, and building the new treatment plant in Celeron.
Don, are you part of that South Center? Are you advisors to that? Are you, do you, in your role as planning department, do you get working with the South Center Sewer District?
Not directly. Dave McCoy in our office has worked with the extension of the sewer district along with Pierre, and actually a consideration of potentially extension of a water district also.
So tell us about that. We got, while you got the mic down, what you might know about the extension. I mean, we've got the sewer district potentially coming to Chautauqua, and I mean, this is more than just a pipe dream.
Well, it is. It's in the engineering phase, as I understand it. Pierre, I'm sure, can probably fill in many more details about it because he's stayed active in that particular portion of it. But it was the result of an integrated sewer management plan for Chautauqua Lake.
And as, of course, the part of the extension of the sewer is to remove various nutrients, phosphorus, other things from the lake. Talk about perhaps the role of the planning department in the MOA that came out last year. Just for those who may not have been here, last year there were, for at least here at Chautauqua, we had several meetings with all the disparate groups. It worked out interesting to have each had a chance. And I'm not sure we were directly involved, but certainly as a result there was a memorandum of agreement to be signed. Could you, maybe either you or Pierre, I don't care who wants to jump ball, talk a little bit about the genesis of the idea and how it ultimately came to be?
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I think the county executive at the time, who was George Borello, recognized that there was a need to bring the groups together, and that there was a sense that there were many arguments and that weren't being resolved, and we had to find some common ground. It was an initiative put forward by George at the time, and he really did spearhead leading this and going and meeting with many of the groups. And then it was our challenge to, not so much my own, but Mark Geis's and others, to put together some of the language that went into the memorandum of agreement.
Pierre, as far as the substance of the memorandum of agreement, I suspect your eyes were on some of the terminology before it found final print. Where did all of that substance come from?
Greg, yeah, I worked closely with George and Mark Geis in developing that. And if you will, the initiative, the thought was that it's all about the lake. And the people that are concerned about the lake agree on far more things than they disagree on. So the thought was, how can we come up with a consensus of what we agree on, and then we can focus on doing more of what we agree on, rather than focusing so much of our time, attention, and resources on the things that we don't agree on.
So you come up with this document and roll it out to the various stakeholders. Did you get a sense that you would get near unanimity of signatures?
Well, of course, you always hope for complete success. You always hope for a batting average of 1,000. But realistic enough to realize that probably wouldn't occur. We got all but one of the stakeholders to sign the memorandum of agreement, and that is better than what we had thought we would get.
Part and parcel of the agreement is an understanding as to where, a couple things, herbicides, where there would be harvesting, where there would just sort of lines of delineation, the absence of litigation, the pretty much a collaborative effort. And do you get a sense now as to how the results were? Both the planning department, if they've had reports, is there a thought as to what 2019 brought?
I'll speak. Don certainly has his perspective on this as well. I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but certainly in 2019, there was a lot more focus on the lake. There was a lot more resources that were deployed to help the lake. There was a lot more focus and attention on the lake. And there was, as you point out, an absence of litigation. So we got the parties to agree on what we can agree on, and there was no actions taken that would have violated the agreements, the tenets of the memorandum of agreement. So in my opinion, that was significant progress. We accomplished quite a bit in 2019. We learned a lot in 2019. Many people felt the lake was more usable in 2019. There's always opportunities to improve, but the absence of litigation was a huge piece of the progress that was made in 2019.
Don, from your perspective of the planning department, what was your sense of 2019, kind of if you had to put together a scorecard?
Well, beyond what Pierre just said, which I completely agree with, I think one of the things that we were pleased with was the fact that a lot more data was collected in 2019. There was a third-party monitoring that occurred after the herbicide application. We have had drones that have flown the South Basin to collect data. We've been out in the sheriff boats to assess the situation. I think going into 2020 and coming out of 2019, we have a lot more information to begin to refine what we do and understand what's happening.
If I can, touch off that, and Don, thank you for that perspective, which I neglected. One of the things we accomplished in 2019 is that as we have learned more about this very complex ecosystem that we call a lake, it's focused us on how much more we need to learn, how much more data we need, and that's definitely focused our attention going forward.
Pierre, while you've got the mic there and my camera, you also wear several hats. One of them is chairman of the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. And as I understand it, that organization is the recipient of a number of grants from local foundations and from the Chautauqua County as well. It goes to the Alliance, and then you have a grants committee, and maybe, I think you've just announced some awards. What was the focus of the awards insofar as Chautauqua Lake was concerned? What areas did you focus in on?
Well, our interim executive director is sitting not too far behind you, Vince Horrigan, and he is certainly what I would call the architect of what we accomplished in the latter part of 2019 for our grants for 2020. And first, what we need to make clear is that the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance is a member organization. We have members that pay a fee, a dues, to be a part of the organization, to be a potential benefactor from the grants that we secure, state, federal, and locally. And our members are all the municipalities surrounding the lake, as well as all the stakeholders that are involved in the lake and the watershed. So what the Alliance does is that the local foundations say to us, we would like you to help us decide how to make our contributions to help the lake. And so we, the Alliance, brought in a consultant to help us develop a tool to determine what the priorities should be, help us develop a 5-year strategy, and then develop a tool to assess the different needs that are brought to us by our members to determine where the funding should go. So we have that tool which we deploy, and that tool is used by the grant requests that are received from our members. And we deploy the tool, and it's utilized by 3 different groups to evaluate the grant requests from our members. One group is our outstanding Alliance staff. Another group is the Science Advisory Committee of the Alliance. And the third is the environmental consulting firm that helped us develop our strategy and the tool. They independently assess the requests from our members and, if you will, score them, and then those composite scores are given to the Alliance Board of Directors to make our final funding decisions.
Did you get a sense of a theme that most of the applicants were looking for or towards? Was there a certain, I know herbicides application was probably one of them, and harvesting probably another, but was there more of a major and a minor approach towards it this year?
Well, Greg, 2019 is the second year that we've done this for the local foundations. And there was a significant change in the applications from 2018 to 2019. Many more applications were received, requesting many more dollars than the previous year. But to me, one of the interesting things that occurred was we saw a shift in priorities, more towards looking for equipment, more equipment, and the ability to gather data. That key data word again, more learning about the ecosystem. So in 2018, and this is in no way meant to be looking negatively on the requests that were received, but a lot of what we received the first year were doing more of what we'd already been doing. And in 2019, we saw some innovative ideas, some new ideas coming forward. And to me, that was the exciting part about it, is that we've got new energy, new ideas coming forward, more learning, more data, more equipment, new equipment that has never been used before.
So with that priority, there's also a demand for greater money, much more funding. And I suspect that's probably a segue to why we're here today. At some point, and I'll bring it over to you, Don, you probably were charged with, or maybe the history of how the idea of a Chautauqua Lake Protection and Rehabilitation Agency was germinated. What's the genesis of that?
Well, the current history, which is a little bit different than the history overall of lake districts and the potential for lake districts on Chautauqua Lake. But the current history was we were actually approached by County Executive Horrigan at the time to begin to look at this as, was there any opportunity to do this within state law? So we looked at state law and what options there were for district formation, what the impacts could be, what the potential was for fundraising. And that actually occurred probably late in 17. But then it wasn't until the legislature took formal action and formed an agency in 18 that we actually then began to meet with the agency once it was populated by members and go through the process of looking at whether this was a potential solution for funding for the lake.
You sent out a study, you sent it to me, and I thank you. Chautauqua Lake Protection and Rehabilitation District, 2018 is updated in 2019. And there's some interesting facts, and I'll just read them because Chautauqua Lake is a 13,000 acre lake. It has 4,200 acres of littoral, littoral, like I said, zone. 42 miles of shoreline. The Chautauqua Lake watershed is 100,000 acres, 19,000 full-time residents. Just out of curiosity, do you know, Don, from a tax perspective, those property owners along the lake, they pay real estate taxes, and usually pretty high compared to everybody else. What does that percentage consist of, do you know?
The percentage, if you look at the county assessed value, is about 22%.
So, significant.
Yes.
Significant. And part of the challenge of this agency is to perhaps look at alternatives as to how monies might be raised in the form of fees that to supplement that which is coming from foundations and the county through its occupancy tax. I assume that's sort of the goal in all this?
Yes, that's the primary goal.
And Pierre, I don't know how many more hats you could possibly wear. Do you want to be the assistant general manager of the Tarp Skunks? I could add that. I can give that to you.
Sign me up.
Good. We've made progress already. Good. But you also are the chairman of the Chautauqua Lake Protection and Rehabilitation Agency, in addition to the Chautauqua County Legislative Chairman and the chairman of the Alliance. What do you see your task as being? I mean, if you had to explain to this group what the goals and missions of the agency is.
Well, the process of potential formation of the Chautauqua Lake Protection and Rehabilitation District requires us to go through a very prescribed process that's prescribed by state law, and essentially one of the first steps in the process is that the county legislature has to agree to form an agency to study if there is a need for a lake district, and if there is a need, what that district would do, where it would be located, what parcels of property would be included in it, and develop essentially an operating budget for it in terms of where that money would be spent, what it would be spent for, and where the revenue would come from and how it would be generated. So the county legislature agreed that this was worthy of consideration and formed the agency, the Chautauqua Lake Protection and Rehabilitation Agency, to study that and do those tasks that I just outlined, and then bring a recommendation back to the county legislature as to what their recommendation is for the legislature to consider.
The resolution which I have in front of me, which was sponsored by County Executive Horrigan and Legislator Chagnon, also talks about the agency having 9 members to serve without compensation. Who are they, and how was that sort of determined? And how did you come up with the names?
Well, that was County Executive Horrigan's task to determine the representation, but I believe the resolution, Greg, lists that there are a fixed number of municipal representatives. Mm-hmm. There was a representative specifically from Chautauqua Institution, since it's not technically a municipality, but it is in many sense a municipality. And then there is one property owner representative on the agency, not a municipal representative.
And so you get this group, you meet for the very first time. What'd you talk about? I mean, you walk into the room, 9 people, they've all been tasked by County Executive Horrigan. They elect you as chairman, and day one, what's the conversation?
Well, the interesting question. I don't know that I've got total recall on that, but we talked about why we were there. We talked about the process that I just briefly outlined, and we talked about the need. Why do we need to consider? Why does the county legislature want us to consider the formation of a district? What is the need, and what are some of the potential things that the agency could be recommending. So it was really an outline of what the task was and what the need was. That pretty well, as I recall, dominated the first meeting.
So Don, you as a Chautauqua County employee, are you assigned to assist this agency in developing its plan? Is that part of your role?
Yes, our department has been assigned to assist the agency in going through the steps of developing the materials that they need to develop and supporting them as they move forward, guiding them also.
And doing a fabulous job of it, by the way.
You've put together somewhat of an outline and even alternatives. And as you look at this agency, if you had to eyeball a budget of what the potential needs are, I know at the time you wrote this particular report that I'm looking at, you said today's investment, what you are actually identified as what's going on as of this year, or last year, there's about $2 million. Was that an accurate sort of a number?
It is. The agency at one point charged us with going out to all the municipalities, all of the different entities that are involved in the watershed currently, and asking them for their expenditures over the last 3 years. So we looked at a 3-year period, and we looked at watershed expenditures as well as in-lake expenditures. And in between the watershed and the in-lake, the average was around $2.1 million.
And we don't have the benefit of having this up, so I'll just read it. That investment of $2 million, today the county or local governments do not have the resources to begin to address the issues, nor do the nonprofits with a mission to address lake issues, and the reserves and funds being depleted not sustainable in the long term. So that which is sort of flowing now, obviously you need some help in some form or fashion. And that's principally how that might be accomplished. You have a budget, and then you decide where might that come from. Yes, the not-for-profits, yes, occupancy tax, but property owners become a part of that.
If we're going to reach the target, and the target we've been working with for in-lake expenditures is $1.5 million. And so when we look at what has been being spent historically, we don't believe that in between the reserves and the occupancy tax and what the foundations can contribute, that is sustainable in the long term.
So what's the process, Don, of developing develop a plan which ultimately would go to the board, which that board ultimately would adopt in the form of a recommendation, I assume, to the legislature? Is that the 1, 2, 3?
That's the 1, 2, 3, but I think the items that Pierre laid out when he was explaining the resolution really is what we need to go through as a plan. If anybody's been through a sewer district or a water district formation plan, it's very similar. We need to establish the boundaries, and we need to establish what parcels will be in the overall district. We need to establish a 3-year plan for expenditures and look at the cost and the cost per unit and the approach that we come up with, and then present that plan and the facts as well as the need for the district will all have to be part of the plan that's presented.
Pierre, where are we in the process? You were charged in 2018. I'm not sure when it all started, but here we are rolling into 2020 on the continuum that Don just talked about. Where's your committee?
Well, we have an agency made up of 9 individuals, and I would underline the word individuals, who all come to this table with their own perspectives and their own needs, wants, desires. So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about what each of us feels the priorities are. We developed a mission statement for the agency. We developed what we considered to be our objectives that we could all agree on. We actually had the opportunity to have a presentation made by the gentleman who was was really the key person in forming the only other lake district in New York State that has been formed in the manner that we were considering. Juanita-La-Mocha Lakes has a lake district, and so we had that gentleman come to us and explain what they went through with their formation process, how they went through it, gave us their report that was presented to their legislatures. It's actually in 2 counties, and then talked to us about what they've done since the formation. So we actually learned an awful lot from that gentleman, which was helpful. And we've now come to the point, actually we've been at this point for a few months now, where we felt it was time to really go to the public and explain what we're working on, what we're trying to accomplish for the legislature, and get the public input. So Don was very instrumental in bringing a great recommendation to the agency members that we should bring in a professional planning organization that is experienced and skilled in reaching out to the public and gathering the public opinion, views, and comments, and putting that together for us.
Don, talk about that group. Was it Highland?
Yes, Highland Planning out of Rochester.
Yeah. Who are they, and kind of what are they charged with?
Highland Planning is a very small niche planning firm. They obviously, with a name like Highland Planning, do a little bit of community planning, but their specialty has always been public outreach. They've worked with the New York State DOT, and they've worked with the DEC and a lot of other communities, usually around issues that are difficult issues to discuss and have that public dialogue. Anyway, so we became familiar with them at a workshop through the New York State Planning Association and thought that they would be a perfect match for this particular project.
So how's it going to work? Are they just going to go from various points along the lake and get a community hall and they say come one, come all, and will they have an agenda saying, all right, the mission statement of the agency, and I'll read it, is to form a lake protection and rehabilitation district to raise dedicated funds for the purpose of rehabilitation and maintenance of Chautauqua Lake and its watershed. When formed, the district will operate in an open and transparent manner which encourages collaboration and consensus on lake and watershed issues and results in actions that are in the interest of all lake stakeholders. There's a lot of points in that mission statement which can be filled in. Are they going to kind of put that up on a whiteboard and say, let's just talk about that?
They, well, first of all, they are currently in the process of interviewing a list of stakeholders that we gave them. And there are stakeholders that may be for the district or maybe have some issues with it. But they're currently doing phone interviews with each one of those. From that, they will come back to us with what they found at the next agency meeting. And we will form a public survey that will go out to everyone that might be in the potential district. We will gather more information and public feedback from that survey. And then, based upon the survey and the stakeholder outreach, we will do some educational outreach. And then, most likely, our target is to hold a public meeting in June when summer residents can be back and participate also.
Can we talk about, maybe this is a Pierre, chairman of the legislature, question. Talk about the property owners who are non-resident owners, which populate quite a bit, certainly around, in and around the lake. As I quickly read this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pierre, but that from the agency will be a recommendation to the legislature, and then the legislature may pass if they pass the resolution, it's subject to permissive referendum.
Yes.
And question I got is, who votes at a permissive referendum? property owners or obviously normal voters?
To be able to vote in a permissive referendum, you would need to be, first of all, a resident within the proposed district, and you would need to be a registered voter in that proposed district. So if you are a property owner in the district who lives in Cleveland, and that's where you are a registered voter, you would not be an eligible voter on the permissive referendum.
Is there a mechanism that you've talked about whereby at least, other than the public aspect of it, and where they be a non-resident agency? I hearken to the Chautauqua Lake property owners. There's a Chautauqua Lake property owners organization on the grounds which assists in decision-making by Chautauqua. I recognize they're not a municipality, but that's kind of how they dealt with it. Has there been thought about how that might possibly be, or is that premature, or is that even on the radar screen?
In terms of getting their input?
Yeah, more or less their input. They're significant players as far as paying taxes, and obviously have a stake in what's going on financially.
Well, as I indicated, the president of Chautauqua Institution, Michael Hill, is a member of the agency. He's on the agency. So certainly we benefit from hearing his perspective that he brings to us from Chautauqua Institution. And if he were to suggest to us that we should be meeting with or hearing from the Property Owners Association, I'm sure the agency members would be very interested in that and very supportive of that.
So timetable-wise, Don, and I know you're now Highland's engaged, and Highland's going to kind of gather the information from the potential stakeholders, put together ultimately a report back to the agency. I realize it's a fluid thing, but do you get a sense as to the timing, perhaps even the need of the economics of having a district, which would then potentially lead to, you need fees, you need money to sustain what you've put in the report here. How does that match up from maybe a timing perspective?
Well, from a timing perspective, Greg, it's very difficult, I think, to match up the need, because the need has been there for a very long time. And currently, if we were to hold public meetings in June, we would certainly take into account everything that was gathered in those public meetings and work with the agency members to refine whatever product that they were going to propose and recommend to the legislature. So I would imagine that would result in probably 1 or 2 months of work, because it has taken us this long to get to this point. And we don't always have consensus on the agency on different issues, because, as Pierre mentioned, we have individual perspectives as members of the agency that we work with. So I can see this probably optimistically going to the end of 2020, but more realistically probably when you get to any vote or referendum, if a referendum occurs, going into 2021.
As a model, and there are many models that are used, but one that's in your report talks about potential tiers. Just if you actually get to the point of having the implementation of the districts themselves, tier 1, tier 2, and potentially tier 3. I don't know if either you or Pierre want to talk about that, just to give them a sense of at least one model. I'm not saying that's what you're working towards. It could be, but just kind of conceptually what it might look like.
Well, there's not what I would call an agreed upon model at this time. The last time we presented models, there were actually 5. Everything from a single flat fee to a tiered flat fee to a very complicated formula structure that would look at the impact of each parcel and the size of each parcel, and then assess a evaluation to that to come up with a number and a range. So there isn't one particular model at this time. And the tiered model was the one thing that we've always said from the beginning of this process, that we wanted to try in the greatest way possible, whatever the agency developed, to make this an equitable model to the greatest extent. So whenever we're looking at options, that is at least one of the things that we discuss as an agency.
Greg, one thing that I think is important to that concept that you bring up about the potential for tiers is that the state controller has made it very clear, and the county attorney has affirmed the fact that any parcel that pays a fee to the district has to receive a benefit. So we have to be able to demonstrate clearly that if we are charging a fee to a parcel that is removed from the area of Chautauqua Lake, we have to clearly define and prove the benefit that they receive for that. So that really impacts any tier structure that we have talked about and looked at and considered.
Ultimately, does this become a jurisdictional issue of a county law, or does it have to be state legislation?
The state county law provides the provision that the county can form this district without state approval.
And the concept is one of not a tax, but a fee.
Correct.
And
It's a benefit district.
benefit district, okay, sort of like the South Center Sewer District.
It's similar to a sewer district, a water district, a lighting district, a garbage district.
What's the big speed bump?
The big speed bump is that nobody likes to pay more than they have been paying, myself included, Don included. We would all like someone else to pay for what we like to enjoy. I like to look out the window and see a beautiful Chautauqua Lake. I would like to think somebody else should pay for maintaining that and preserving that and protecting that. So that's the big speed bump, is who should pay for the benefit of having a protected and maintained and beneficial Chautauqua Lake.
Do you sense that the timing of this is probably better today than maybe it was a year ago or 2 years ago, given the progress on activity that's from other agencies on the lake, the MOA, for example? Is this the time to really talk about this?
Personally, I think, Greg, that the timing is right to be talking about this, because there is a lot more interest in Chautauqua Lake today. There are a lot more people involved. There are a lot more agencies involved. The municipalities are much more engaged and involved than they had been previously. We've come to realize that Chautauqua Lake is a resource that needs to be maintained and needs to be protected. 10 years ago, we were not talking about harmful algal blooms. We were talking about weeds, macrophytes. The game has definitely changed. Weeds are a nuisance. Harmful algal blooms are a health hazard. So the tenor of people's interest and concern today is significantly different than it was 10 years ago. When I went to Washington 3 years ago and talked to the Army Corps of Engineers about the needs of Chautauqua Lake, I mentioned dredging, and they, When I started talking to them about the harmful algal blooms we were experiencing, that really got their attention. And I can if you've read in the newspapers recently, you've seen that Senator Schumer has made good on his commitment he made to us last March to find the funding to begin to bring the Army Corps to work on Chautauqua Lake.
Just took it right out of my hands.
I'm good at that.
You took the article, there it is. I finally find it, and there it is. How might that, Don, back to you. You know, here's Schumer, Gillibrand, push for quality of lake water to be, and saying, today I'm calling on the Army Corps to include Chautauqua Lake feasibility study in its fiscal year 2020 work plan. And previously, they had also pushed to authorize the Chautauqua Lake feasibility study in the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. Is this political headlining, or is this something that's real?
Can I take that one, Greg? Let me take that one.
Yeah, okay, all right.
This is real personal to me.
Okay.
So, like I said, 3 years ago when we went to Washington, we really got the attention of the Army Corps of Engineers. And they said, if you'd be interested in the Army Corps getting involved in Chautauqua Lake, the first thing you have to get is an authorization for the Army Corps to begin work. That process normally takes 7 years. I said, let's begin, let's get started. 6 weeks later, I got an email from the commander of the Corps that we were talking with, and she said, I was so impressed with what you told us about Chautauqua Lake. So impressed with your passion and your concerns. I pulled a few strings for you, and you're on the list. You're well on your way. 7 years is no longer a matter of discussion. A year and a half after we first met with them, the president signed the authorization for Chautauqua Lake. Okay. So, last year we go back to Washington, and Senator Schumer, who for the previous 2 years was too busy to meet with us, asked to meet with us. And his chief of staff said, you got an authorization. We didn't even know you wanted one. We got to do something for you. Senator Schumer sat with George and I and looked me square in the eyes and said, Pierre, I know how important this is to you. I'm going to get you the money so that we can get the Army Corps to begin work. And I said, Senator, I really appreciate that, but I'm realistic. I've been told that even though we got the authorization, it could take up to 10 years to get an appropriation of money to begin. But I really appreciate your support. He said, Pierre, I'm going to get this done for you. We walked out of the congressional building, and I looked at George and said, I wonder how many people he tells that to. That was last March.
I'll be darned.
He's got the money. His chief of staff told me that he got $30 million for the Army Corps to begin working on harmful algal blooms throughout the country. And he told them, I represent New York State. I'm concerned about Lake Erie. I'm concerned about Lake Ontario. My number one priority is Chautauqua Lake. And the commander of the Army Corps in Washington said, Senator, we appreciate that. We have our priorities, and we will determine who gets the money. Senator Schumer looked at him and said, so you don't want the $30 million then, right? The commander said, yes, sir, we will take care of Chautauqua Lake.
To Pierre Chagnon, all right. That's great. I can see why you wanted to answer that question.
Thank you.
So now, I hate to say now what, but I mean, you've gone from zero, you're in the red zone at this point. What happens next? As far as the funding and what it's going to be, what it might be used for?
Go ahead, Don.
Well, I really would have to leave this up to Pierre. He's a hard act to follow. The funding, I know that Dave McCoy was active. Dave went down with both Pierre and George to this visit. He usually helps coordinate this. Dave works in our office. Dave is the Chautauqua County Watershed Coordinator. And Dave's been active in pursuing this, always defining what the Army Corps is going to spend the money on is difficult. There's a very long process of working through what they do to create a work plan for what that expenditure will look like. So I can honestly say at this point, nothing has crossed my desk that allows me to say this is the basic work policy that they will pursue. So I would hate to put anything out there that then fell through later.
Well, I guess I'm looking at just the press release, so you don't have to say it, but to carefully examine the destructive, repeated harmful algal blooms in Chautauqua Lake that have diminished water quality. I mean, I assume that's the general topic that they're going to work on, the details to follow, which the Army Corps would recommend. But point is, it's coming here.
Right.
Yeah. Don, from your perspective, as we're kind of going to draw closure here pretty soon, and I will try to get Pierre's thoughts about the Super Bowl before we end. As you looked at a crystal ball, Don, the planning department, because I know you often do 5-year plans, that's what planning departments do. As you look at this particular agency, how do you see it? We're 2025, we bring you back here. What are you going to say are the results? You'd like to see as results.
What I'd like to see is the results is an agency that is very functional. Back in 1976, I just stumbled across this today. Actually, in 1976, a person who was probably a young man at that time from Syracuse University wrote a thesis for his master's program that was called An Argument for the Formation of a Lake District for Chautauqua Lake. He was a Lakewood resident, and that particular document called for the formation of an agency, and one of the things they said way back in 1976 was there was no one entity that represented Chautauqua Lake and had the fiscal and legal resources to do so. In forming this particular lake district, we are still trying to accomplish what he tried to springboard way back in 1976. So what I would hope is that we have successfully formed the agency. They are working with all of the partners within the lake arena, and you actually are beginning to see progress on Chautauqua Lake as far as water quality and the issues that have faced it for many years, because even in the report from 1976, some of the same issues that we're facing today were issues back then. And that is one of the challenges that I think we need to get past. There have been many attempts at districts. 1976, it was mentioned. Actually, the planning department at the time, the director, John Lunsman, communicated with our state senator and our assemblyman at the time to try to see and begin discussions about that. I'm uncertain why that didn't go forward. There were discussions in the 90s. There was discussion in 2000 when the first watershed management plan was put out, which was a sister document to the State of the Lake report. And then there was the Dale Robbins effort. Now, here we are today. So I look at that as a long history, but I'm determined to at least work with the agency and see if we can maybe make this to the finish line in some form, whatever the form the local residents would like to see that in. But the ultimate goal, I think, is the one that everyone has, which is for the betterment of the lake.
Let's name the person who was the 1976 thesis writer. Do you remember his name?
Richard Lynn.
Richard Lynn.
Mm-hmm. His father was a doctor in the Lakewood area.
Yep. Just passed away.
Passed away.
Just passed away. So, Pierre, I know you probably want the final word, and again, crystal ball has been handed to you, you're rubbing it, and you got 5 years of snowflakes. What do you want to see here? What's the goal?
Greg, the goal for me has been the same since I was a young child, enjoying Chautauqua Lake, on it, in it, around it. The goal is to have a resource that we can pass on to the next generation that is usable, is beautiful, as productive, as beneficial as what I experienced as a very young child. That's my goal. That's what keeps me going. That's what I work on. And if you are ready to give me the final word, there's a lot of hats that I wear, a lot of things that I do, and we've made some incredible accomplishments, some incredible progress. And it reminds me, I was telling my daughter today, it reminds me of a saying that we used to batter about at work. The difficult things we do easily, the impossible takes a little bit longer.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, Don McCord, Pierre Chagnon, thank you. We miss that we should have asked your dad. I'll give you one question. I'm violating my rules. One question.
Next project you'd like to see completed? What's your top priority project, since you wear so many hats?
The next project I'd like to see completed is I'd really like to see my daughter give us our first grandchild. Which is scheduled to occur in just a little over a month.
Congratulations. That's good. Well, obviously that'll happen before there is a taxing or a fee district. With that, we stand adjourned.